I would like to thank you for your participation in the build community and your attendance today. Additionally, I want to commend you on your desire to grow, learn, and develop as a security practitioner. Tonight, we will be discussing the anatomy of an attack. So who am I? I'm a graduate of Florida A&M University with a bachelor's degree in computer science. I additionally received my master's from the University of Dallas here in Texas, or Dallas, if you will. My professional career, I worked at Ericsson as Ericsson Network Systems as a software engineer. One of my first roles when I graduated was testing text messaging before it came commercial and other class of service features. Transitioned to L3 Communications, which is a defense contractor, where I worked on missile systems for the US government. Then I went to Texas Health Resources, where I actually started my career as a cybersecurity engineer. And I currently work at JPMorgan Chase as a digital forensic software engineer. So before we start, what exactly is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is the protection of computer systems and networks from the theft or damage of hardware, software, electronic data, as well as disruption or misdirection of services they provide. There are three main elements to be considered for cybersecurity. Collectively, they're known as the CIA triangle. First, we have confidentiality, which is to prevent unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. This is commonly done by access controls or encryption when it comes to software. It can also be implemented at the network through VLANs and Active Directory if provisioned correctly. You can have a group for finance and a group for HR, and then you will apply those policies or those groups to those particular set of folders to ensure that the other group would not be able to access that information. Secondly, we have integrity, which is ensuring the accuracy or completeness of data over the entire life cycle. This is technically done by the implementation of hashing. When you have MD5 or SHA-256 or 12, you may know that when you go to download certain websites, or when you download software from certain websites, they'll give you an MD5 sum, and you can then verify the software when you download it on your home system to make sure it's the same hash value that was provided on the actual website of the vendor, because sometimes attackers can compromise the repository. Next, we have availability. And this is ensuring that data and systems are available when needed. The disruption of service could result in loss of productivity. We actually seen this earlier in October, early October, with Facebook after the whistleblower incident that happened on 60 Minutes, as well as we seen this last week when we had to reschedule. There was an outage out in one of the AWS regions. And I'm not mistaken, Outlook.com was also affected yesterday. So how many of us have mobile phones? What good is a phone without any power? We have all this technology in our hand, but if it's not available, doesn't have any power, we can't really use it. The way that we can get around this or mitigate the loss of availability is through backups, having business continuity plans and disaster recovery. So these are tests or exercises in which organizations purposely take down one set of systems to make sure that they can still have other same availability in their backup systems, and also load balancing. Hot sites are ideal. A hot site is when you have a backup site that stores data in real time and is quickly operable in a disaster strike. And you also have a cold site, which just has power, network, and HVAC, or heating, ventilation, air conditioning. However, there is no infrastructure. So now we'll talk about the cyber attack chain or kill chain. These are a sequence of steps or events that are used to attack an organization. So we'll start with initial incursion, which is how does the attacker get access to the environment? As we go over the first three boxes, we'll notice a common theme of vulnerability. So vulnerabilities are weakness in an organization's information systems, internal controls, or system processes that can be exploited. This week, we were informed about the log 4J vulnerability, an Apache or Java vulnerability has been in the news this week. With software vulnerabilities, we often have the option to for remediation, which could be removing or patching. You may be familiar with Adobe Flash or Adobe Shockwave, in which those are now being taken from out of the organization. One thing to point out is that not all vulnerabilities are the same. Things to consider is, can the vulnerability be exploited? Can it be exploited remotely? Once it's exploited, does it give the attacker the ability to access your organization and move laterally throughout the environment? Depending upon your organization and your organization's risk appetite, you can choose to accept the risk of that vulnerability. In a previous position, we had end-of-life systems and end-of-life software language. However, we had sufficient compensating controls to accept that risk. These particular systems that were end-of-life were placed on a separate VLAN where only they could access only access the vendor's IP addresses or domains and on restricted ports. That way, there was no other, through firewall, but there was no other way for those systems to be connected to. One thing I do want to add a vulnerability on here that's not pointed out are people. These are employees. Mm-hmm. Do we as organizations train our non-technical users not to click on the proverbial dancing cat video, or even our technical users? Do they know how to configure their systems appropriately? Are they changing the default passwords? Was there a question? Okay. Next, we have where threat actors, we have buy access, where threat actors will buy access from systems that are organizations that have already been compromised. This is normally done on the dark web. We have malicious emails, which are phishing attempts, especially during the holiday season. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us majority of us may use Amazon. You'll be surprised at how many people will click on an Amazon email, however, they haven't placed an Amazon order. This malicious email will give attackers access to your environment, as well as malicious websites. And the websites themselves may not be malicious. However, when we think of our news hosting sites, such as USA Today, Huffington Post, CNN, some of the images you see, those are actually ad spaces that people buy. Attackers will buy that space so that when someone clicks on it, it redirects them to another site that can be malicious. So after we have the initial incursion, the attacker then try to establish a foothold through a compromised endpoint. That vulnerability has been exploited on either the endpoint, the mobile device, or the server. Another thing is through compromised accounts. So compromised accounts can happen in one or two ways. That's by password spraying, and that's where one or two passwords are used over many usernames. So I'm here in Texas, so I would use the password, Dallas Cowboys 2021, one exclamation point. And depending upon the size of your organization, that may actually work. So once again, I'm using one or two passwords and I'm spraying the whole organization. Another way is to have a brute force attack, which you use many different passwords over a small set of accounts. One way to mitigate this particular vulnerability of a user account is through multi-factor authentication. Next, once an attacker has established a foothold in your environment, they will try to establish command and control. You may hear the term popping the shell. So this is when an attacker will establish a shell or a session on your computer. This can also be done through protocol tunneling. There's a protocol called DNS, which is Domain Name Service, which when you type in builtinternational.org, it translates to a series of four octets that computers understand. So attackers can use that particular protocol to infiltrate your organization, because we need DNS to work. However, with proper configuration through the firewall, we'll be able to circumvent that. Outbound web connections, and also your internet-facing user accounts. So you think about when you go to your bank and you have to log in, that will be considered an internet-facing user account. So after command and control, users would, attackers would want to escalate their privileges. And they do these in several ways, such as a password keylogger. They can harvest your credentials, pass the hash ticket. There are other variety of different vulnerable exploits, hijack the session, or maintain persistence. This is one reason why we should encourage our organizations to have two separate accounts. The account that I use to log in when I first go to the office to check email or check the intranet site should not be the same account that I use to access our administrative sessions. They should be on a separate password policy, and preferably that password to get those, to access those systems should change daily. So in case an attacker were to get on your system, they could use an application called Mimikatz to scrape the SAM hide file in the registry and crack your password. However, if it changes consistently, they may be able to get access your password, which is still an issue. However, they won't have access or limited access, or maybe your organization will have time to find them in the environment if you have those two different accounts. And then they want to move laterally throughout your environment. So it's one thing to get on my system, but when they get on my system, will they be able to get on other systems throughout the environment? The systems that have the crown jewels, if you will, whether that's source code, intellectual property, customer or employee, TII, social security numbers, date of birth, things of that nature. And then the mission is complete. That's when they are able to breach the three pillars of cybersecurity. That is confidentiality, where they're able to exfiltrate the data, integrity, where they have the ability to modify the data, and availability, in which they can destroy the data. So one thing I also want to point out is that even though these are a sequence, it doesn't always have to start at initial incursion, because we always have to remember about the internal threat, right? The insider, the employee who didn't get the promotion they thought, was mad that someone talked in a particular way. So these are some things that we have to think about. Some cybersecurity careers are, application penetration testing, digital forensics, which is the ability to identify what happens on a computer. I'm sure if you're familiar with like CSI crime shows, you always look for that, blood or that fingerprint. It's similar with computers. Whether we are aware or not, everything you do on a computer is tracked. And it's not so much because, the vendor, Microsoft or Linux, wanted to have that capability, is to make things more easier for you. When you click on a Word document, you're typing, and you go, a 10-page document, we'll say, and you go to page 5, and then you close the document. The next time you open that page, it actually, if you want to start where you left off, that is, you can actually identify that because of, with different forensic tools, what employee was looking at or what they're reading. So it wasn't by design that that happened for digital forensics. It's just that organizations or defense companies know how to access that information, as well as incident responder. The reason I have this highlighted is this is where I started off in cybersecurity. It's in the middle because when you think of a security incident, you get to know the various technologies or become aware of the various technologies, endpoint, web proxy, email proxy, firewalls, IDPS or intrusion detection prevention systems. So that was actually my favorite position within cybersecurity because I learned a lot. I also have malware analysis. Once you get a piece of malware, or you can reverse engineer it to identify the different IOCs or indicators of compromise. What IP addresses is a malware calling to? Then you take those IP addresses and you put them into your firewall, as well as a particular hash value of that particular malware, so you can find it throughout the environment. Threat vulnerability management is identifying threats such as what we just talked about earlier, the log4j, how many systems have that particular vulnerability, and what is your method or organization's method for being able to control that. Then we also have security audit and risk specialists. This is actually on the GRC side, which is governance, risk, and compliance. And then another one of my favorites, aside from digital forensics and incident response, is penetration tester. Once you have that vulnerability, are you able to exploit it and then access the system? And now we're going to go into a demo. Does anyone have any questions before I proceed? If not, I will bring up my systems. So what we have here is Kali Linux. It is an open source application that is managed by Offensive Security. I also have a version of Windows XP. So if you have Windows XP, please don't use it. I'm actually using it for this purpose. However, there are organizations that still use it because they were coded for the particular operating system or particular set of software. And depending upon the organization, it may be hard to upgrade. So that's when we talked about earlier about compensating controls. As well as now, the other system I have is called a Windows 7 system. So what I'm going to do is just to assure something, I'm going to verify the IP addresses on my various systems. So we see the Kali system, our attacker system is 10.4. This will be our target system, Windows XP. We see it has an IP address of 10.0.28. And then our other system, our Windows 7 system, is 10.0.25. So normally what attackers would do is they perform some type of reconnaissance about your organization, go through various means, who is database to identify what your IP addresses are, your subnet range, and then they'll scan your network. So there's an application called Nmap, which is short for Network Mapper. This comes inherently on most Linux systems. However, if you go to the website sechtools.org or sechtools.org or sechtools.com, you can also download this for Windows. So I'm going to type in the command nmap -p. The -p is to tell, so I can specify what ports I'm going to use. And ports are similar to windows and doors in our homes, right? They're entry points in and entry points out. So these are how computers communicate with the outside world, even internally within your organization. We all may be familiar with port 80, which is to communicate online on the web. Also port 443, which is for secure HTTPS when we want to do a banking transaction. Then next I'll type in the command, and there are a total of over 65,000 ports. The reason I'm specifying 1 through 1024, these are the well-known ports. So some of your services like the FTP, which is or SSH, and also Telnet are within this port range. So we don't want to, for time's sake, go through the whole all the ports on the target systems. I'm gonna type this -T5 just to spin it up. This tick O is going to give me the version operation. And then I'm just going to type in the various ports. Now I could use, or this application will also use IP range or CEDAR notation. It's just that I don't want it to go through the time of using all those. And even though this tool is on a, so no tool is inherently bad by itself. It's the way that tool is particularly used. This would be good for organizations to run applications such as Nmap, so they'll know what's within their environment. You want to make sure that everything, it's called inventory management. So you want to make sure that everything that is found with this tool or any other application you may be using is something that you know about. So you're able to identify those vulnerabilities. So when we run this command, and it says finished, 3 hosts done. So the first one that it found was the actual Kali system itself. It said too many hosts to find. That's done intentionally by the makers of Kali Linux. It is a penetration test application. The next we have is 10.25. As we go through, we see the ports that are open. gives us the MAC address, and I'm using Oracle VirtualBox, so it's actually giving me the MAC address of the NIC, and it's telling me that we suspect that it's going to be Windows 7, Windows 8. Next, we go to our other device at 2.8. It's showing the various ports that are running, and it tells us that we suspect this may be Windows 2000 or Windows XP. So at this time, I'm going to shut off my Windows 7 virtual machine just to save memory, so we won't run into any issue. Once it shuts down. So right now, let's concentrate or focus on the Windows XP, which will be our victim machine. So this is our organization. We can go look and see what they have. We see there's a folder called Acme, a folder called Private, and within that we have password, and 6/11/2015 is a password, hypothetically, right? Real quick, I want to come to our Linux system and do an ls, which is similar to the directory command or dir command in Windows, and we see we don't have anything in here. This will be important later on. Another thing we want to do is go to show what users we have on our machine. So if I go to control panel, user accounts, we see that there's one user, the computer administrator, as well as the guest account that's actually turned off. Another important command that we as security practitioners should become familiar with is called netstat. I'm going to use the parameters NAON, and it tells me what my particular device is connecting to. So anytime we see 000.135, well, the zeros, those are the local address or local host, if you will. And we're familiar with these ports because they showed up on the Nmap scan. And as we see over here, all these show listing. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start an application called Metasploit. It is a penetration test framework that's written in Ruby and has some also Python libraries, if you will. So if you give me a moment while it's running, does anyone have any questions while we're waiting on this to load or start up? Awesome. So if you give me 1 second, please, and once it's finished running, we will go ahead and proceed with the demo. Probably could have had this running in the background initially, but didn't want to think anyone to think I was fudging the results. So now we see we have the prompt MSF. We know the reason we're using Windows XP is there's a known vulnerability for SMB on port 445 or service message bus. And we know this from using a national vulnerability database. So this is a good way if you know what kind of systems in your organization, whether you're a Cisco shop or a Microsoft shop, you can go to this national vulnerability database, plug in the particular model or your appliance, and it'll tell you if there are any outstanding vulnerabilities. So one thing we want to do is we want to use, type the command use exploit, Windows 8. So we see that my cursor just changed. So now I'm using the exploit for Microsoft 08. So if I want to do show options here, and we see that we have a variety of different things we can choose from. It says target address. We're going to set this to be the IP address or the IP address of our victim machine. And we said that was 10.0.2.8, just to verify. I'll come over here to verify that. Right now it's going to use these are default, so the port is going to use, excuse me, as well as the pipe. So once I hit enter, we see where it's set to our host. However, we measure twice and cut once. So I'm gonna go to show options again, and I see that the target IP address is listed in the target address. So one thing we want to do now is set the payload. And depending upon the payload and a particular exploit, you have different capabilities. We type exploit. As we see on the machine, attacker machine, it is giving us some feedback. And we see the last line that said interpreter session open. It gives us our target IP address, and it's communicating on port 4444 to our victim machine. So as we've seen earlier, when we ran the netstat command, everything was listing. Now if we do netstat again, we will see we actually have an established connection from address on the foreign address 10.0.2.4. And this is the port that is actually using port 444 on our local machine. The port that's listed on the foreign address, that's an ephemeral port, which is just a communication port that you use to talk out. So now one thing we can do for my Kali Linux machine is let's see what's on this machine. So I'll type sysinfo for system information. So it says this Acme, this name of the computer, this is domain, 2 users logged in. So if I want to verify that, I would come to start, control panel, system, and we see here that if I click on computer name, it says Acme 24, so actually is the East Lake domain. So next, we can see what else we can do from our attacker machine. I'm going to type pwd, which in Linux is path of working directory. However, I'm just going to snoop around. But since we know where I can look, we're going to go to the folder where we've seen the private file. Do pwd one more time to make sure I'm at the root of C. And we see we have a file. Well, we see that there's a file called private.txt that I've accessed on the VIX's machine. Once again, we're going to go up, we're going to type clear ls, so we see we have no files over here. However, from the Metasploit console, I'm going to type download private text. It says download it. So now when I type ls again, we now have the file that was on the victim's machine. So we've just breached the confidentiality portion of the application. So just to verify, we'll type cat private.txt, and we see we have the same password 611.215 that we saw over here on the other side. So another thing I can do, now that I have the actual data from the victim's machine, what I can do now is I can change that data. Remember, this is part of the integrity. This is going to bring up BI, which is a editor used in Linux. I'm just going to change this data. And for those who are familiar with cybersecurity, there's a phrase called "you've been pwned," which means someone's compromised your password, your account. So we're going to exit out of this. I'm going to quit it. So now if I were to come back to that same folder on our victim's machine, we see now that what used to be 6/11/2015 has now been "you've been pwned," which is unbeknownst to our end user. on the other side. Another thing that we can do is create a bad file. So next, I will come back to my interpreter window, path of working directory. We're in the admin folder. So I'm going to change to the root of C. And one thing that should be a main takeaway is we need to know what our normal is. What is our baseline? What ports should be open to use on our environment? We've seen that port 4444 was being used. However, also what type of software and also what type of folders. And that's important because of this reason. So I'm going to CD to Windows. One thing I want to show you before I proceed, if I go to Windows, when I speak of knowing normal, we see that we have a variety of different folders that are installed or created by default once you install the application. We have system, has system 32. As an attacker, I want to blend in. So I don't want to have a name like, Gerald Trueblood that can stand out to someone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a directory. System 33. So once I refresh my system, or the attacker system, or sorry, the user's endpoint system, I now have a folder called System 33. It's empty because it was just created, and we can tell by the date timestamp, or DTS, that it was just created. So now what I want to do is I want to create a bad file. So within my Kali Linux system, I'm going to create a file called evil.bat. Not going to be anything in it, just evil.bat. And this could be any file. I'm using bat because bat is for batch application that runs on Windows. Could have easily been PowerShell or Python or something of that nature. So next I will type upload. So I'll make sure I'm in the right folder, pwd, C Windows, good thing I checked, CD system 33. Let's to upload. So it's telling me that it has finished uploading. So when I actually look in our target folder, we now have a file over there, which could be any kind of virus, malware. I've established command and control, or anything of that nature. Another thing that we can do is we can type net accounts, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Oh man, excuse me 1 second. This isn't good. Man, how do I stop? I apologize for that. So one thing that we can also do is come back and the file that we had seen before, like I said, say for instance, we wanted to remove the file. So we did change the data within that folder from the 611.215 to ubempome, but now we can also delete that data. So if I cd back, see it's still there. So now I can type rm, which is remove in Linux. I do ls now. We don't see that folder, or we don't see that file on our Linux system. We also see that it's been removed from our target system. Are there any questions at this point?
Yes, I had a question. So, were the hackers able to change the password because the victim had a file folder that included their password on their computer? Or did that just make it easier?
So what we were showing is that the attacker was able to compromise the system and actually access that file. In this particular case, it was we used an example of a private file that had the word password in it, but it could have been anything. So not necessarily a password file. It could have been intellectual property, could have been source code. It's just that we were demonstrating that the attacker had the ability to access that data by
Okay, thanks.
compromising the device. Ma'am?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of a thing of mine because I wanted to show something else and I didn't have the command. Now I'm trying to find it. So if I don't find it now, we'll go ahead and proceed. But it's kind of a, this doesn't happen on my watch type of thing, right? I want to actually get a shell on that system. Okay, wow, I feel so crazy. So now that I've, as you see, we have actual Windows prompt on our Linux system. I just typed the word shell. So this is what you normally hear when you say people say, we're actually able to get a shell on the targeting system, which is most oftentimes the goal it makes it easier to assist the goal. So what I wanted to do is I want to type the command net user. And we see, as we have seen before, I'm able to identify the user on the other system. The reason this is important is because later we'll be creating another user, and it helps me because I know what type of naming convention or organization uses, right? It could have been first name, last name, but once again, similar to when we created another folder for Windows 33, we wanted to blend in. So when we create a user, we'll be using this similar construct. Another thing I can do is do net accounts. And what net accounts does is it tells me the password policy of the organization. As we see now, there's no minimum password age, no minimum password length, the duration of the lockout. So remember earlier when we were talking about brute force attack or password spraying, knowing this information will help me be able to identify that. There are other different things you can know with the net command. If you have a Windows system at home, I would advise you to play with this just to know more about it. Wouldn't necessarily recommend you do this at work. You may set off some alarms and you'll may get a call from your particular system or your organization through incident management. So now that we know the type of password policy and the name of this particular user, one thing we want to do is to maintain that persistence to ensure that if this user were to log off or change their account, that we have a way back in, we can do another exploit, another payload, excuse me. Once again, if we were to type show options with the command as it is, if I can expand this a little bit and I run it again. Oh, well, it shows here, it shows user metasploit. So that definitely would stand out in the organization if we had users that have user 1 through N, and then we have another user called metasploit. But one thing we can do is create another user. So we're going to type set user to, we want to set our own password. And we use a default password one bang or exclamation point. Definitely don't recommend you do this at home. It may sound funny, but if we go to like the top passwords within the last 4 or 5 years, we'll see that password 123 is on there. QWERTY, which is the top row of the keyboard, those are on there as well. So next, we're going to type exploit. It said exploit created, but no session was created. So let's see if we actually have an account over here. So we'll go to our control panel, go to user accounts, and we see that there's a new user on our target system called user 11. So, I mean, it's one thing to create the account, but did it actually, is it valid? Can I actually log in with it? So what we'll do is we'll come back, go to start, hit the log off, we'll switch user. We will go to user 11 and put in the password. And we see we now have, we're able to start in the loading. We have a personal settings, and we now have our own workspace, if you will. So one thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to our other user. I just want to demonstrate the ability of the tool, Kali Linux. So from a blue team perspective or incident response, how would you know if that actually happened in your organization? One thing we can do is we can check the event viewer. So we go to our control panels, look at administrative tools, or look at event viewer. And if we look under the security tab, and I'm gonna filter on the particular event ID that I know in this case, just to save on time. You see that we have two logs here. One says group member added, and it has the user 11 that we spoke of earlier. And this is the other information regarding that. Like I said, this is a legacy version of Windows XP. So that event ID is not the same for current systems such as Windows 7, Windows 10, or even the most recent server versions. If you do want a full comprehensive list of the different event IDs for Windows, you can go to ultimatesecurity.com. I believe that's the name of the site, if I'm not mistaken. So we see that we have 172 events in our security log. We have 1 event in the application log and 55 events in our system log. However, if I'm an attacker, do I really want someone to know that I created an account? Furthermore, going back, we see that when we looked at our system, go back, administrative tools, show user accounts. It shows that I'm a administrator. Only certain individuals within the firm should have administrative rights on computers. And once again, it shouldn't be anything that they have directly. They should be able to log out. But because I am an administrator on this particular account, and I was able to compromise that account, I was able to create a user. So I'm going to do another exploit. What I'm going to do now is type the command clear EV from my attacker machine. And this is actually a short name for clear event viewer. And you see here it says wiping 1 record from application, 55 from system, 177 from security. Personally, most attackers wouldn't do this because if you were to wipe everything, that gives off a signal that something happens. A way to clear your tracks without being known would be just to clear the entries that were pertinent to the activity that was done. That would be just clearing any logs that had 636 in them. So I'm gonna close this, come back to administrator tools, go to event viewer. And as we see now, we click on application. You was 1 record, there are no records here. Click on security, only shows this 1 record, which is probably going to show that the system had been wiped. Oh yeah, audit log was cleared, so that's definitely going to set off some alarms, as well as the security system that doesn't have any information in it. One thing that organizations should look into is having a SIM, which is a security incident event management application, and different activities such as Windows event logs should feed into the SIM. You may have heard of, Splunk, Elk Stack, and I'm not here promoting any individual application, just some of the ones that I've worked with, or some of the ones that are known within the community. But you would feed this information into a SIM, which would give you a single pane of glass. So as opposed to having to look at however many systems in your environment, you can set up an alert. So when we see a user added from someone that's not a domain, will require some tuning, you'll be able to alert on that and start the investigation process. Because unbeknownst that most threats go undetected in the system, the normal dwell time for an incident is about 90 days. So we're talking, so we have 90 days of an attacker being inside our organization. So I'm gonna type one more command, type screenshot, and we see that a file was generated on the root with the JPEG extension. So if I come back here and I do ls from Windows, from my Kali Linux machine, we'll see that there's a file over here. So one thing I do is I just click on my Explorer with a file folder, double click that icon. And we see that on our Kali Linux machine, we have the same information or same display of the desktop that was on our victim machine. So I could have been typing in a password, and even those passwords are somewhat redacted. Unfortunately, some users may have passwords written on their computer. So if you open up a particular file to see what a password is or account, so this is some of the utility of this particular application. So we've shown where we can breach the confidentiality from accessing the data, the integrity by changing the data, and now the availability. We deleted the file, or if we really wanted to be mean, if you will, we could shut down our attacker machine. It may not be a big deal if it was just, user John Doe, but had it been one of, financial company or one of the big box stores that are, selling information, if their service went down, imagine how bad this would look from them from an organization standpoint, as well as how much revenue they could particularly lose. So one thing that should be a takeaway is an acronym called Pickerel. This is something that I actually got from John Strands. He was a SANS instructor, or SANS, SANS.org. The classes can be pretty expensive. However, they have a wealth of information, free tools, free white papers, knowledge articles. So even if you don't take a class, I recommend at least going to the SANS portal and creating an account so you can access the information. But one thing that we should always, and this is a rotating evolution, well, not rotating evolution. This should be part of our normal process of Pickerel preparation. Are we prepared for an incident? Do we have endpoint protection? Do we have firewall configured, a web proxy, email protection? Are we able to identify a particular incident? Are we able to identify the incident? As we just seen, I logged in from another machine on a known port. I didn't change the default port that's used by Metasploit. Also, I was able to create another account. That's something that's going to be can be identified. Also, containment for the C. Even though I only had one machine, now that I was able to compromise that machine, I was able to go through the net command. I could see if there were any short shares mapped. And also, most applications have, or Windows applications, I should say, come with RDP. Is that something, and very seldom do organizations turn off RDP, which is on port 3389. So that's one thing we need to also consider. DNC is another application that's used, but we just want to make sure that we know what's running on in our environment, and that we do identify a threat, are we able to contain it? What was the particular IP address indicator of compromise this particular threat, or the hash of that particular threat? Eradication. So now that we're able to contain the particular incident, are we able to remove it? And then what does recovery look like? Did we have backups? Are we able to recover that file private.txt to see what the initial password or source code or accounting information was? And then lessons learned. What are the things that we learn? We take the IP address and we put in our web proxy, not web proxy, but in our firewall. If it was a particular website, do we block that site? Do we block that domain? So as we see, this is a constant evolving process that each time there's an incident identified, we have to go back and tune our environment. So thank you, everyone. I'm here for questions if you have anything. The floor is now open.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that you have two login IDs, one just for administrative purposes, and ideally you can change the password daily. How do you facilitate that?
So what I was trying to indicate is, so I log in as Gerald Jenkins. So that gives me the ability to log in, check my email, go to our intranet site. But when I want to access other applications that can change the environment, security applications, I would use another application. And that's just creating another account through Active Directory. What we use in the past is an enterprise tool called CyberArk, which is a password management application. I find them very successful. You can establish different policies. As we've seen with the, when I did the net account, it actually gave me the password policy for a standard user. However, with the privileged access management tool, you can set up different passwords or set up different password criteria, certain number of certain length. And you also have it generate itself. That's the biggest thing. And we actually have to go in, check that password out every day, and you can set it to change at midnight. So once again, the password that you use to log into should not be the same, or the account that you use to log into your computer in the morning should not be the same account that you use to configure the firewall, for instance. That should be a separate account that's managed separately.
So what I'm confused about is, how do you actually get access to the new password with your regular user account?
So in the organizations I've been in, I would use my current ID, and then I will have two-factor authentication. So I use a token, either a RSA token that gives you, 6 digits, or a soft token. So it was able to, something I have and something I know, that's the multi-factor in it. So I'm able to verify that that token, and the token has a serial number on the back that's assigned to my user. Did I explain that well enough?
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, sir. And if not, we can always take it offline. You can send me an email or connect with me on LinkedIn.
Hey, Gerald. Yeah, I have a question for you. Yeah, just now you mentioned that you use a software token or something like that. So how do you manage that? It's just like you install that application on your computer and also on your phone.
We're gonna say this. So I have a Gmail account, and Gmail, and I'm sure other providers of mail clients, Yahoo, Microsoft, offer two-factor authentication. So one thing that I can do with my phone, and it may not show here, but if you ever heard of Google Authenticator?
Yes.
Yes, so Google Authenticator is a way to, I want to show this, but then I have to show my password. Actually, it's about so yeah, so if you download Google Authenticator, that's similar to having a two-factor authentication. However, excuse me, Christopher's point, you can have that assigned to a particular ID, so that every 30 seconds, that password, that passcode that's on your token will change.
Okay, I got you. So like if you and your colleagues manage a lot of computer, like different servers that have so many username and password, that will be very challenging for you to do that, right?
Yes, sir. But personally, I don't recommend. I don't like putting individual accounts on servers because they're harder to manage. Earlier we talked about Active Directory groups. So I will have a group called Information Security and add that one group to that particular server through Active Directory. So once a user joins the firm, we're able to add them to that particular group. And especially when a user leaves the firm, we can remove them from that group. So rather than trying to identify, to your point earlier, all the disparate servers within the organization, we have a single place where we can do the management. Because if you provision individual users to servers, it'll be hard to track that down. So definitely recommend using Active Directory groups.
Okay, cool. Another question for you. Just now you mentioned that one of the courses, so it's what kind of course you said when you talk about the PICERL? At that time you mentioned a course. So what that course is?
So I mentioned there's a course with Pickerel.
Yeah. It's just a Pickerel. I can search that and there's a website or learning.
So I apologize. So I took a class at SANS 504, which is Hacker Techniques and Incident Handling. And throughout that class, the instructor gave us this acronym, if you will, PICREL, for preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. What I was saying is that the SANS classes in themselves are relatively expensive. However, if you work for an organization that gives that provides training, in which all organizations should, then SANS is one of those classes. But there are also other classes that you can take, certifications, like the OSCP, which you may have seen the Kali Linux system that I was using. That's actually provided by Offensive Security. You have EC Council, which has the Certified Ethical Hacker. So, but even still, if you don't have the SANS training, I would definitely recommend that you go to the portal, sign up for an account, and that way you'll be able to just take advantage of some of the various research that is done, some of the webinars or webcasts.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I got you. Thank you, Gerald.
Oh, yes, sir. So we see a question. What are some systems applications that can help with cybersecurity monitoring and alerting? With most systems in the environment, I would say SCOM or System Center, which is used from Microsoft. There are also different open source tools, WinAgent, and depends on, I mean, that's a hard question because it depends on the type of environment you have. But if you have one application that I actually was a fan of was Cylance from BlackBerry. Cylance Protect is an actual endpoint device, and it would actually write to the various, it would report to our SIM. And thank you, Kevin, for putting that in there, the Incident Handler's Handbook. So yeah, that has information. And for those who, yeah, so like I said, if you just go to SANS.org, you may not be able to access it directly, but yes, like I said, the 5 or 10 minutes, the 5 minutes that it takes to create an account. They also have a free ISOs or system images that they use for training that has a variety of different forensic tools on it as well. Are there any more questions? Could this attack be done if the password file was hashed on the rainbow table? Yes, Leroy. Actually, it could probably be done a lot faster. As I mentioned, there's an application called John the Ripper or Cain and Abel. Those are other, we'll call them password auditing tools, but you can put that information in there and access them. And also, like I said, I know I want to say I said this earlier, but I don't know if I used the correct, what is it? Oh yeah, sectools.org. So this is the website I was speaking of. As you see, Wireshark for sniffing the wire, which is for man-in-the-middle type of attacks. Metasploit, which is the application that we use, the MF console. Nexus is a vulnerability application. You have Aircrack, which is used to crack, WEP and WPA passwords. Snort is kind of like a log analysis. So this goes to a question that we have from Dream. Cain and Abel password attack. Backtrack was the initial Kali. Netcat, good tool for, like we mentioned earlier, about protocol tunneling. This is a way, say TCP and UDP, which are different protocols for a variety of different ports. That's a way to get things out. John the Ripper we have here. So would definitely encourage you to go to sectools.org to just get some tools and download. In case you're wondering, I'm actually using VirtualBox. So the VMs that I had stood up are running out of VirtualBox. So it's a lot less expensive, it's open source, than what you would use for, what's that, vSphere or Hyper-V. I'm relatively frugal. I don't want to spend the licensing. However, if you have, just go to virtualbox.com. You can download it, as well as go to Kali.org, and you'll be able to find your get an ISO of the Kali Linux distribution, which is here. So I don't see any more questions. I can hang around for a while in case anyone has any other questions, or Peter, John, anything you need from me?
Not from me. Thank you.
Not from me either. Great presentation, Gerald. So we also, for everybody else's knowledge, we do run a ethical hacking series. We ran 2 this past year. We align with CompTIA's Pentest Plus. Yeah, and Gerald, we'll talk more on our 2022 offering. Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir. And to Veronica, Oracle VirtualBox. I can actually bring it up. Give me 1 second. So Oracle VirtualBox, like I said, you go to VirtualBox, download it. I have several ISOs. You're wondering, how did I get a Windows XP? I'm one of those tech guys that don't throw away cords or discs, much to my wife's chagrin. I just have a box full of old things. So you never know when you'll need something, right? So, and some of the stuff you can download. You can go to Microsoft and you can get a license of a particular application. So that would be how you could do a demo like this at home to practice your skills. As well as you can go to, oh my, it's escaping me right now, but if you just Google vulnerable VMs, there's a VM called Metasploitable that has different vulnerabilities to it that will help you find the various, that will help and assist you with their training and development. Yes, I've seen someone's hands raised. Did I miss it?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I do, Shay.
Okay, so I'm new to the tech world. I'm just learning. There's so many stuff out there, systems and jobs out there. How did you figure out what you really liked and was good at?
Oh man, yeah. So when I first started, so my first job was, as I mentioned earlier, was with Ericsson after I graduated from Florida A&M University. And when I wasn't developing, I was doing QA testing or quality assurance testing. So that's one of the, which is actually penetration testing or security in itself, right? If you look at different SQL exploits or cross-site scripting or SQL injection, it's all about range bound. So say, for instance, you go somewhere and you put in your zip code, it should only be looking for a 5-digit number. What happens if you put in spaces or special characters or numbers, right? Or letters, I'm sorry. The application shouldn't crash, it's handle it gracefully. So I like breaking things or seeing how things actually work, which kind of led me into the path of penetration testing and digital forensics, which I actually got into it. I was working in the defense industry, and before we can go on a government site, we had to take the Security Plus exam. So that was my first introduction into security formally. And then, as I mentioned earlier, well, I didn't mention this, but when I was in telecom, I was affected by the events of September 11th. I left Ericsson to go to a startup company to get more money, which I would never recommend. This was my, I don't want to call it professional regret because it got to where I am, but you should never leave a company for more money because you can have more money, but the people you work with or the hours, you wouldn't get a chance to enjoy it. So it took me about 3 or 4 years to actually find another career position, and that was with L3 Communications. But what I would like to, let me see if I can find this, that could probably help you out. So if you do a search on Professor Mesner, he actually has training videos for Security Plus, which I would recommend at a baseline for getting the cybersecurity. It tells you the attacks, threat, vulnerabilities. As you see, the length of the videos, they're very educational, very informative, the different type of attacks. So I would recommend, like I said, looking up Professional Mesner, as well as if you go to, what's the name of that site? Give me a second. Resources.infosec-security.com. You can find a variety of different type of jobs, job types. But yeah, if you just do a standard search on cybersecurity jobs, I'll just. And that's the one good thing about cybersecurity. There are
Cannot hear you, Gerald.
Hey, Gerald, your audio just went real low.
Penetration testing, threat, and vulnerability. I'm kind of a hands-on person. I like to do a lot of tinkering. So that's how I ended up in the path that I'm on. And it was part of my practicum. So it's hard to actually provide that response because it varies per person. Thank you for this, Chris. And it also, it's not always technical because there is the governance, risk, and compliance side that we spoke of earlier that has like auditing on. So making sure that there's least privilege within the organization. Like I said, I'm the the nerd techie type. I like to push buttons and such. I'm gonna trust you, Kevin. I'm gonna go ahead and paste this link in here without vetting it first. That's what security professionals do. But thanks to you for this YouTube channel, and that's about to come up. Oh, awesome! Yeah, so I would definitely recommend Professional Mesner, as well as go to SANS. I'll actually do this while we're here. We have time. Resources, white papers, webcasts, tools, blogs, podcasts, plethora of information that you can access, and different posters. Actually, let me type that in. Cybersecurity posters, right? So just looking at different cybersecurity information could help you find out what exactly specialty you want to do within cybersecurity. I hope that was a good enough answer, Shay. I know I didn't say it specifically, but and once again, that's going to vary per person. I like to break into stuff, and I like to find out how stuff is broken into. So that kind of leverages the digital forensics and penetration testing. But like I mentioned earlier, with cybersecurity being so vast and the different types of positions, you'll always find something that intrigues you, especially with mobile stuff, right? So, mobile forensics, as I mentioned. So, yeah,
Hey,
like I
Gerald,
said,
can I make a comment too?
yes, sir, please.
Thank you. So for our membership, what we'll be offering in 2022 as well, since there's, such high demand for cybersecurity training and just networking as well and opportunities, we do plan to run a Security Plus track, CISA Plus, which is the cybersecurity security analyst track, and Pentest Plus, which we ran 2 courses this year. So we'll be running that. We have, a partnership with CompTIA. So we usually raffle off about 5 certification vouchers and some other goodies as well. So hopefully, if you're a member, you'll be able to sign up for that. I think we just charge, a nominal fee just to make sure folks are invested and interested. But we have a lot of great offerings planned in 2022 and people to meet so you can be on your way with a career in cybersecurity.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that, John. I neglected to bring that up. I know Peter has done a good job of bringing different trainers to the North Texas chapter. But yes, once again, I'm here at SAN, so you can search white papers. You can narrow down on a specialty. From the previous page, I went to webcast. Like I said, also another good site that I like, take you to the YouTube site, is this is the gentleman that actually gave me the acronym PICREAL. They have a variety of different things. They just had a walkthrough talking about the Log4j. But yeah, I would recommend Black Hills Information Security, their webpage as well. You can sign up for their various trainings. They have a class called Pay What You Like. So so as little as $20 to maybe as much as, well, whatever you like, really. You can take a variety of different classes. SOC analyst, actually, let me go ahead and go there. They changed the way it looks, but yeah, if I go back, like active defense, cyber deception, this teaches you about honeypots, where, say for instance, you're in an organization and you have a cluster of servers. You can have one of those servers mimic a real server. So if an attacker were to get that, you'll be able to get threat intelligence from that attacker. Because you don't always want to kick the attacker out. You may want to see where they're coming from, what they're trying to do to help you strengthen your organization. But yeah, like I said, definitely recommend Black Hill Security. If you see the front page right here, home of Pay What You Can. So they understand that it can be daunting to go to SANS and pay upwards of several thousands of dollars for SANS training. However, their mission is to ensure that we have cybersecurity professionals, and not everyone is at that point now where they can pay that amount of money. So definitely recommend. And some of these classes they didn't have when I looked a while ago, so I'll definitely come up and join. So yeah, I don't have anything else. Does anyone have any other questions, comments?
Yeah, just one thing, Gerald. Have you noticed that enterprises are moving to use Chromebooks for the security features, or no?
No, I have not. In the organization that I work at now, I'll say about 95% of our workforce doesn't even have computers. which I remember when I worked prior to this, everyone had laptops. So for those of you who do have company issue laptops, make sure that you talk to your or CISO or information security department to ensure that those devices are encrypted, because if not, you open yourself up to a breach. We use a tool called CompuTrace or Absolute to remotely wipe devices. However, we have policies that state you should not save PII to your desktop, but how many users actually follow that rule? I mean, we use DLP, which is digital loss prevention, on our perimeter, and as well as on our endpoint, so we can tell that a variety of different users did not adhere to that. However, one thing that you can do as an organization is to prevent or limit the scope of the breach or incident, is to make sure the device is encrypted. So if someone were to get the hard drive, plug it in, they'll be less likely to get it. However, I'm not sure about the Chromebooks. As I mentioned, our organization, unless you are a developer, you don't even get, and that's a very small limited number of developers, depending upon what kind of project you're working on. Everyone uses VDI or Citrix. So I can access it from my home, or I can get in the office. We just have thin clients. Oh yes, Wild West Hacking Fest is, thank you, Leroy. They're a derivative, or they're in a partnership with help me out, Black Hills Information Security. I mean, personally, I don't want to offend any Android users because I'm not brand specific on anything. However, what I will say is, if you look at Android phone, how many different versions of Android iOS are out there, as opposed to different for providers. One, I mean, you have a Samsung, a Google, a Motorola. You have different brands, and then there are different operating systems from KitKat to I don't know the other different varieties of versions off the top. But because the Google, another thing is that anyone can make software for Google, which is good. However, at the time, I don't know if they actually screen the software, right? People could write software, write games. What was the game? Oh shoot, what was it? Candy Crush. But why were there like 500 different Candy Crush games inside of Google's Play Store? Well, some of those had Trojans in them, and the Trojan is like if you have a particular game that you're trying to buy, but there's another game into it, another application that's installed in it. So in my mind, I'm installing Candy Crush, but within Candy Crush, this kind of goes back to the Trojan horse, Troy, where the men snuck inside of a gift that was given inside of a horse, right? So at the end of the night, they all came out and killed the natives. So that's kind of the same thing of a Trojan horse when it comes to security. But I'm not sure. Like I said, only thing you want to make sure is that you have endpoint protection. Like I said, I can't recommend any one particular brand. I know the ones that I work with that I like, and that your device is encrypted. That's the biggest thing: encryption and endpoint security. And once again, thank you for joining. I'm about to show the Built International page. So if you're not a member, I would encourage it. As John spoke earlier, there are multiple benefits of joining. I know here in Dallas, we've had CSSP boot camp, or CISSP, excuse me, boot camp, as well as Cybersecurity Plus, which is offered by CompTIA. You may be familiar with them. They also have the Security Plus. In addition, ITIL type courses in Six Sigma. So no matter what facet of technology you want to get into, Built has something to offer. So if there's nothing else, I will conclude the meeting. Once again, I can be found on LinkedIn at Gerald Trueblood. Yeah, just Gerald J. Trueblood. All right, thank you, everyone. Have a blessed night. Merry Christmas, and enjoy your weekend.